Do you like conversation on a variety of topics? Feel like no one wants to talk about the things that interest you? Tired of only hearing the same political, sports, or catastrophe talk? Yeah, we feel that way too. Join two high-functioning geeks as they discuss just about anything under the sun. We can't tell you what we'll be talking about each week because we don't know where our brains will take us. It will be an interesting conversation though, so hang on and join us. Here comes the Relentless Geekery. I was on a call with Reese the other day, and he said he's got something with Chrome, maybe a plugin or something that allows him to change the background on any conference software he uses, regardless what it is. And we were using Zencaster, and he changed the background.
That's interesting. I should look into that. I stay so much in Safari without using Chrome that I haven't really checked into all the add-ons and extensions and everything that you can get there. And so I will look for that.
Yeah, he didn't know what it was, which I was like, he's just built in Chrome. I'm like, no, it's not. I don't have that I've ever seen. He's, oh, I don't know. Okay.
I will look for that. And it's funny, I think this is now our third session where, oh no, look at how cluttered my office is.
It's
And yet,
not.
have I
That's the background you chose.
exactly. It's funny. I never think of it as being like tottery stacks and stuff like that because it doesn't matter. I have no excuses except that it was convenient to always have the holiday or the season or the whatever else going on instead of it being, wow, Al, you're like a sick pup with all that stuff. But
Yeah, I'm the same way. It's not dirty. It's a little
right.
cluttered, maybe stacked here, there, and stuff. Like certain things, some of my books, some of my games. And my son even says, how do you do this? It's like your desk, you clean it up, and then I come back 2 minutes later and it's covered again. I'm like, I'm in the middle of this and I don't want to put it away because I'll lose track. And I'm doing this and I got this. I'm like, there's just all these things going on. And then they just pile up. He, I must say, is a much usually neater person than I am. He's grown into that. He didn't used to be. He's changed in his.
Honestly, before I had to pack all my stuff up and left to go to California to do my .com things for a couple of years, my house in Hoffman Estates was much neater. Everything was in shelves and alphabetical, and my comic book collection was all arranged. And my desk, my work setup was, I might have had certain things like you just said, whatever I'm working on, and it wasn't just one thing, it was 10 things, but they would each have their own stack. And when I got done with things, I really had files and I put them in so that I could find things quickly if they weren't currently underway. And going back years, I had, if at one point, like every time you do taxes, you don't like just look at the last month worth of stuff. It's a whole year worth of stuff. And I never had a problem with pulling out all of my receipts and all of my big purchases and that kind of stuff. And then going away and having everything be in the storage lockers for a while and coming back and that situation still persisting because Colleen's house was not as big as my house in Hoffman Estates and I really had to store stuff. I've just never reasserted that. When I get things coming in, they go on the stairs instead of being that I have the new shelf versus the archived shelf. It's the last 25 years. And I guess when you're 65, 25 out of 65 is whatever percent. I miss that, the rigor of it. And this is funny. I used to do my taxes. Some people are really good about Quicken and having all their things all the time be current, but I just never liked that. I never liked having every day I put my receipts away, kind of like unnecessary overhead. But when I had to do my taxes in that last like big 3-day burst of getting ready for April 15th, I didn't have a problem putting my hands on everything I was going to have to look at. And even if I was there shamefully at midnight, there was one place in Schaumburg that the post office stayed open until midnight so that you could file your taxes on time with the right postmark. Even if you didn't go until business hours, 5 o'clock, you went and there was a whole line of cars that were doing just what I was doing. And yet I don't know, man, whatever it is about damn the man for having to pay taxes, or I'd rather spend 3 intense days out of 365 days doing this onerous task instead of every day niggling away at me with something that I should be. And luckily I married the tax lady. She's really good at those kinds of things. And so as long as I keep my files in reasonable enough stuff, she interviews me as to where'd you spend your money and what are these things, are business deductions or charitable contributions or whatever else it might be. And we've had no problems with taxes all the time that we've been together, even if I haven't been the one to do them. And it's funny. I don't know. Do you remember like when Macintax first came out, that produced from a regular printer submittable things for the IRS, that you didn't have to get a form and then line up the form so that it printed in all those microscopic. It was an incredible breakthrough. And I just so much loved it that I got good at doing my taxes, because it made not only the act of producing them, but like it got really good at interviewing you. It would not only have you fill out the forms, but it would walk you through. Do you need a schedule A, B, C, D? Do you have this and this? And I actually, at one point, like whatever, I don't know what it is with the IRS nowadays, but at one point, 0.5% of the United States got the proctological audit. You know what I mean? Because I had a certain number of, I had a home business, and I had to justify every single thing that I had done for that entire year. And I think I ended up owing them like $8. It wasn't like, oh my God, I've screwed up and I've been revealed as a tax fraud. No, I was right in line with it. And when I brought my stuff in, IRS agent was actually like, wow, I don't know that I've seen somebody that has something to back up virtually every single thing. And they don't compliment you. That's not their job. But it was very satisfying to say, even though I've got this crazy rush at the end, I guess my system works, because if I survive the audit, that usually, like, you don't go to jail, but they sure fine you if you have missed something, not put things in the correct spots, you know what I mean, on
Right.
the correct schedule, whatever. And so I guess that's another thing that then emboldened me. If I really had to go through that and I survived, I guess I'm okay. I guess I'm really, whatever I did to learn how to do my taxes, instead of having to have, back then it was H&R Block. You went to one of those places and you brought your shoebox full of receipts, kind of like beggar hat in
Well,
hand, but I learned to do it.
right. Most of my receipts anymore are digital. So,
There's that too. But
yeah.
nowadays, that's how I go through, what have I bought from Amazon and what have I got from Apple? My major big things. And out of The Wealthy Barber, a book that I often quote, if you take care of the biggest things, like the top 10 things, the next 100 don't matter as much, because these top 10 things were $3,000 worth of expenditures, and everything else was a book at a time, a magazine subscription, whatever else it might be. But having said that, if you just go through your bank account and you kind of like, you do it on paper, take a yellow highlighter and say, this was indeed a business expense. This was a business trip that I took. And I did keep track of either my mileage or the cost of staying, or how you hop online and go, that was a 330-mile trip. It was very easy to put together all the defensible numbers. And I guess you don't have to be exactly accurate, perfect, but it has to be like, I didn't at the time keep a book in the car that tracked my odometer readings. But if you have mapping software, you can always
Yeah.
find out what it took to get to Chicago and back. And so I just never had worries that I've never tried to cheat. You just try to,
Right.
if you have a complex life and you have multiple clients and you're building your business, you don't always know what's going to turn into something that you want to claim later, but you just keep track of things and have, it's funny, going into it a little bit too much, but not really, because isn't this an experience that every American, every nerd has to go through? Is taxes is all the time. And you don't want, I had a home office, but I never claimed all the deductions that go with that, because having to put together, like, that's where you get into the real nits and grits of, do you have a separate door that lets you, other people who come to your home, come into your office, as opposed to having it be that I just happen to have a home office and it's my living room. I never wanted to raise a single red flag. I never wanted to have anybody come visit me and say, your short and t-shirts are not a business uniform, because people claim crazy things once in a while. I just stayed away, and I don't think I ever had to pay taxes. I always got a refund, and it was just the size of the refund that I was vying for. You know what I mean? Like, it, I hope that, I've been paying taxes since I'm 18. So 47 years worth of taxes. It's pretty cool to have never, having had people that I worked with in business, like just at Pete Marwick, and seeing them early starting to fudge on their expenses. It's like, what are you doing? People would get a ticket for the train, and they would buy a ticket that was less distance, more distance than what they really wanted so they could charge in more expense and get more money back. You're risking your job for $17? The fuck is wrong with you? That
Yeah,
it's this weird little, some people love getting that edge. Whatever it is about, they don't want to play the game. They want to learn the tricks of the game and then try to get an edge on everybody else. And I was
right.
like, boy, it's so much easier to just, if you don't lie, there's less to remember, says Mark Twain. You know what I mean?
Right. And I was going to say about the cluttered office or desk or whatever,
Yeah.
people that have such clean houses and don't have enough stuff to clutter it are usually very boring people. I've had family members, I've had friends where I know a guy from work. I was talking to him and he goes, "Oh, yeah, my rule of thumb is if I haven't used something in 3 months, I get rid of it." He's like, I got a air fryer for Christmas set up. We used it on Christmas. I realized I used it the first week of January and haven't used it since. So I got rid of it. And I'm like, but
Wow.
you could still use it. And I'm like, there's just things that I don't get rid of, like my bass. I do not play my bass every day. I may not play my bass for a month or two, but I'm not going to get rid of it because I'm going to want to play it again. These same people, what they don't read. They don't usually go and get together for like game night. They go to the bar, they drink, they sit at home and watch sports, and they work. And that's their whole life, and that's boring. So I'll take a slightly less than ideal homes and gardens house speaks volumes to me.
I used to, early on in my career when I was interviewing, and they would say, what databases do you know? And I would go into it's not only that I know them from school or from work. If you're a collector, if you have books, comics, back then LPs, not CDs, you have to learn how to manage your collection. And so early on, it was, I just had a list and it was alphabetized. And then after a while, it was a spreadsheet and you could change the alphabetization based on, is it the title? Is it the year that it was created? Whatever. And then databases came out and always whatever commercially available way long ago, there was a thing called FileMaker for Mac. There was not only in the work world, I used IMS and IDMS and all the very big commercial things, but there were smaller versions of that you could do. And I got good at all of those things, good at SQL, good at what makes for a good database. So if you're a good consumer of those kinds of things, you can say the features that I'm looking for is this, the ability to create ad hoc reports, the ability to do multiple sortings and that kind of stuff. And I think that what you're saying, if you live a life where what you need is your TV, as opposed to, I've got all of these CDs. I want to be able to know what I have because when I go shopping, I don't want to buy a duplicate. Especially early on, the first thing I ever did this was comic books. That if you have Iron Man and you're missing certain issues of Iron Man, but you have to keep track of exactly which ones they are because if you're spending your hard-earned lawn mowing money, you don't want to buy number 17 when what you needed was number 18. And so I early on learned to be good at all those kinds of tracking things. And that's been through how many different generations. Nowadays, I use collectors software, that is collector with a Z on the end. And it's really good because it's on the net and it has all kinds of capabilities and it syncs with places that give you comic book values and all that kind of stuff. And a number of times I've had to make the big decision of, I used to use Comic Base and it was within their software and I had done a lot of cataloging. So I had a lot of my time. I had to see if there was a way of exporting it to import it to this or say, I'm going to restart. I'm going to recatalog everything because the capabilities of this are so much better that I'm abandoning the old and going with the new. And that's one of those first realizations of a lot of places, they don't have an export feature because they want you to be addicted. They want you to, once you're
Right.
in, they don't want you to go to some other competitor. And I get, boy, that we haven't really talked about this. Like databases are a wonderful thing, but I don't know, 80% of the world couldn't care less
Yeah,
because they don't have enough things to justify it.
and a spreadsheet is not a database. I'm just because that drives me so nuts when people say, "Oh, I stored it in the database." What are you talking about? You work with a database, and they pull up Excel. I'm like, it is not a database. Yes, it shares some commonalities. There's its use, the way you're using it, but it is not a database.
Right. It doesn't tie into other tables that, like just that, if you have publishers, it isn't only that you want to know who published the comic, you want to be able to pop over and say, this publisher, its address is this, and it's been around for this long. And trying to tell people about the capabilities of that. And boy, I often was the guy that would interview people for what company I was working at, because I was able to ask the questions that found out, are you really only like topical in a certain thing, or do you go deep? And just by asking them questions about that, about the difference between a hierarchical or a relational or a network database, and the why you would choose one over the other, like much of my consulting has always been, not only can I do it, but can I help you shop for the thing that it's the right combination of features and cost, and that your people, after I'm gone, your people need to be able to understand this and maintain it. And I don't want to get you more than what you need, because then you're addicted to me. I'm the priest that helps you interpret all of these things. And I've had many a discussion without like trying to say, you don't know what you're talking about, but making sure that they knew that if you ever need this kind of capability, you're going to have to step up. If you're keeping track of name, address, phone number, real basic contact database type stuff, but what you want to be able to do is have a link to someone's
state. The state, don't enter it each time into that Excel spreadsheet. A database will
exactly
have a
that.
separate table with a state, and you reference it, because then you can do your reports. You can use other addresses without entering that state name
Again,
500 times and misspelling it.
and when I first, honestly, I'm in Ohio 25 years now. When I came here and find out that every single county has its own separate tax, that it wasn't one tax for Illinois, and maybe individuals like in Illinois, Cook County and maybe two other counties had their own extra thing. And so you had to learn to handle that. But even things like cleansing, we have talked about this. When you find out that people don't know how to do address normalization, that if you want to have it be that every avenue is AVE and every street is ST, and that if you're trying to make sure that you get all those things without having to worry about the variations that you put in there because you weren't consistent in how you were entering your data, then you want a database that allows you to say, cleanse this, go look at what the government approved zip codes and state abbreviations and street, all that kind of stuff. And as things as simple as you live on O'Hara Avenue. Was that O apostrophe H or is it OH? And various different whole products, big products were consistent in how they did it, but they didn't match what the government or the world had decided. And I had to explain, that's one of the big things I've had to explain at Ameritech, at CBOE, all kinds of things of the reason that you're not getting exactly the results that you expect is because you haven't accounted for is Mac MC or MAC, and is the next letter capitalized or not. And if you're sorting on the basis of ANSI versus EBCDIC, where capital letters are considered different than other, like you had to take them through. I know that you don't want to hear this, but it isn't as simple as
Yes. Oh,
one
that,
way of alphabetizing.
is still something I combat to this day when I have to talk to like management and explain some computer stuff. And it's always, how long is that going to take? I need an answer to, how many of these are there? Do you want me to do A or B? And there's multiple things that change that time frame. I need to know how long this is going to take. Okay, then answer me this. Whatever works. This is the better way. No, that's not going to work for us. Okay, then I guess we're doing it this way. I don't know about this. Oh my gosh. Just tell us how long it'll take. I don't know. The one I love is, okay, we got this problem. Oh, can you fix it? Probably. What do you mean probably? I don't know what the problem is yet. I have to figure it out. What do you mean figure it out? It's like they think your IT, it's like, I'm on a server by this company. It's a certain hardware. It's a certain OS with a certain operating level of OS, running a different program and a version, running this certain plugin. And that combination is just click, right here's the answer and the button. I press that button, it fixes it all. I don't, it could be this, 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 it could be these 5 things, but it could also be this and this. There's 10 things it could be. I'll look at the top 3. How long is that going to take? It's good. If I find it on the first one, it'll take 10 minutes. If I find it on the 5th one, it's going to take 5 hours. Oh no, it can't take that long. You call somebody to make it take faster. Calling somebody is never going to make it take faster, because it'll take longer to get a hold of them, explain the situation, and set up a time with them. And I can figure it out in a couple hours. Yeah, but if you don't know what you're doing, yeah, I do know what I'm doing. That's why I'm doing this. And it's, oh my God, how long does it go take? I said, it'll take 5 minutes. Okay, great. But it'll take 4 hours to figure out what to do for those 5 minutes. Well, what do you mean? I was just, My buddy Casey, and not being elitist or anything, his boss told him, he said, because Casey was complaining about something, and his boss looked at him and said, yeah, it does suck to be the smartest person in the room. And he said, I've kind of lived by that philosophy for years. He's because I realize, and we've talked about this, again, not being elitist, but if 100 is average intelligence and we're at, let's say, 150 range, that's 50 above average. So 98% of the people are not as smart as us. A lot of times we are the smartest person in the room. And if your IQ is further apart, and it doesn't matter if it's 80 and 110 or 100 and 135, it's far enough apart. You have problems sometimes communicating. So if I'm dealing with people that are in the 85, 90 range, that's still normal range. We have problems communicating. And I'm always texting him. I'm like, God, I hate being the smartest guy in the room sometimes. He goes, I feel you.
I got good at, sometimes you have to use the analogies that you fall back on and stuff like that for the reason this is hard is, and go through examples. And unfortunately, once in a while, even after you give what you think is going to be the example that's going to get the light bulb to go on and it still doesn't, it's wow. I guess what I have to say is you have to trust me.
Yes.
It's harder because we could, if we just do it bluntly, like it's going to break in 3 months. And I'm pretty sure that you want it to be fixed once, not fixed 4 times each quarter when you keep on finding things that aren't right, but we didn't take the time. Wow. Long ago at Ameritech, we had a big, like a big project to try to get, not only to get what are the things that we can standardize on within the company, but Ameritech was 5 different states. And so you had different databases and sets of data for everything. And I luckily was quickly in a meeting at one point able to pull up, we're using an internal thing, the social security number, to track employees. Here it's called ID number. And here it's called ID underscore and number written out. And here it's called SSN. And like, this is, I just started to look, but you can see that all of these exist. And if we just said, like for year 2000, we're going to update the dates so that year is 4 characters instead of 2. That'll fix it everywhere. Not if it's YR or YEEAR or all the ways in which this could have been stored. In some cases, they put it out there as a year, but they put it out there as 6 digits or 8 digits, or they included the delimiters, the slashes, and we're going to have to do a whole bunch of cleansing of the names of things and then of the actual data to standardize it. And then we have to put something out there that says to every coder, you have to use this new standard or it's just going to start to get filled with corruption and cruft again, because I know that people have, and I understand how it happened way long ago when people really had to worry about every single bit and byte. And it mattered that you didn't store more data than you needed and that you had certain assumptions that you would make that would make it run faster. If you have a year and you're going to do a mathematical operation on it, but you stored it as characters, and I'm going all the way back, obviously, now to IBM times when a char versus a num was a different thing. You had to say they must have code in there that converts that character set to a number before they do the arithmetic. And so if we're going to update this, we have to find everywhere that it does that transform, because otherwise we're going to break things or miss things. And how many times I really sat down like old fan fold paper, right? White and green, and going through and saying, you can scan down this and see that somehow they managed to get bad data in here, that sometimes they put leading zeros and sometimes they didn't. And the default values, if the default value was 1900, and they just, this is funny. We don't ever mean to bring politics into it, but this is exactly the kind of stuff that has beset the Doge idiots who think that they know everything, but they don't. And they go into the Social Security database and they said, look at all these people over 150 years old that are getting checks. And you forgot to check. That's what they had to do with the way the date was back then, that they actually have a flag that says whether they're deceased or not, that it's not just a matter of the year. And so by not understanding both the data and the code, but making sweeping assumptions about it, like you haven't done the first step in due diligence for understanding how this system works. And yet
because they might have. They might actually realize and know that. They just don't want to say that so it could look the way they want. It's spin.
And that too. Either it's ignorance or it's feigned ignorance that they know more than they do. But then when it gets revealed and you find out that they had not only found it but awfulized it. You must have read about this, that they claimed $80 million worth of stuff, and it turns out to be not 30 but 1, and it's not 80 million but 5. And the fact that you might be able to find 5 million suspicious things out of 17 trillion, like another thing that I often talk about that just seems to always fall on deaf ears, you have to maintain a sense of proportion. Destroy, abandon a system that has a 0.02 error rate, because rebuilding has its own error rate of just finding all those same old problems and ironing them out. And like the minute we have some Canadians working here at our company. Oh, they don't have a zip code. They have country codes and province codes and whatever else it might be. Addresses, since we talked about already, is one of those weird, tricky things. The minute you have to start putting any kind of European thing, you find out that this thing it is not numeric, but alphanumeric. And it varies based on when it was instituted in England versus Sweden and it's just amazing how quickly it complexifies, because people are so provincial that you've never sent a mail to your relatives in Germany, that you had to use their mailing standards so it would get to the little town in Weissenhorn that my grandparents lived at. And it was just like, wow, thank God I had exposure earlier, so I was aware that it isn't the same around the world.
Yeah, the first time you do some project that's getting addresses and you do it internationally as opposed to domestic, and you're like, oh, this is not the same.
That's right. And everybody has these stories, but for instance, Colleen worked on a system at a bank where the assumption of the system was that things would never go to like negative value, that it would always have some value for some investment instrument. And then you find out that they really can. And having to explain that, sometimes it's not only a matter of right or wrong, it's that the people that have been working on this code for 40 years, it's them. They have a lot of pride and it's their baby. And having to explain, you made a starter assumption long ago that is now proven not to be true. What are we going to do to resolve this? And you have to even convince them in the first place they broke the dollar. This really has gone below the value of I understand why you made that assumption, but it is not now true. And we have to handle this.
Or it may have never been true, but the users have just found workarounds to make it work.
Absolutely.
And that makes the data worse later when you upgrade and change the system.
That's right. It's funny. From all my data cleansing that I did with Pete Marwick long ago, this is my favorite example. As soon as they started to have tracking of sex, male or female, because they had to report that to the government. They had maybe I don't know what washroom you were going to be issued a pass to. They tracked it. And then we got into somebody's data and it had I in there. And it's like, indeterminate? Incestuous? What could the I stand for when it's really, at one point, it was just male and female? And you found out that they had interns that would come in, and they didn't have a field that was dedicated to whether you're full-time, part-time, etc. intern. And so they said, we can put it over in this field. And then the people who know now, they'll always look for that. That's where, and then of course, those people left, got hit in a fiery bus crash. And then it became this artifact that we had to find out from the one person remaining that knew, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember when we started to put that into the sex field, into the gender field. And so I think those little time bombs in all different kinds of code where it's called overloading a field. You know what I mean? There's something that should only have this kind of data and maybe this set of values. You find out that they started to play with it instead. You know what I mean? And, oh, well.
A big system I built for them, we were talking about like 16 years ago now, and they're still using it. And they don't want to take the time and money to fully upgrade it, fully fix things. And there's been through the years a lot of things added on just because they've changed payment processors or changed outside service that's tied in.
Yeah.
But they have all these little workarounds, and they'll say, this broke. And I look at them like, what is this? And they're like, oh, we've been doing that for 20 years because the field didn't do what we needed. So rather than add it in, we just do it this way. And I'm like, that's why it broke, you know?
I know I've had something as simple as you have a date field and maybe 8 characters. So you figure it's here, month, day, year for the things. Then you get somebody that it's more efficient if you can sort directly on it, because otherwise 0, 1 through 1, 2, they sort in a different order, but anything with a 0 is less than anything with a 1. But then someone starts putting in the better way to do it, if we have year-to-year comparison, is to go four Ys, then MMDD, and that's more of a European standard. And if you have anything with Europe, it's DDMMYY in the reverse order. And either one of those standards is fine, but not if you mix them. Not if you start to have, for a while, 1900 and then 2000 breaks it, because now it doesn't matter the examples. It matters you have to have a standard and stick to it. And different coding styles or different, we acquired a Canadian company and they use the European standard. And now all of our years are breaking that this.
And we didn't want to take the time and money to import the data and cleanse it thoroughly. That would have taken too much time and money. We had to get going. So we just brought it in this way. Okay, that 10 hours you would have spent then, now it's going to be 50 hours. There it is.
I am sure that there's all kinds of things. At one point I was talking about we should do a company like late 1900s that says we know there's going to be how many companies are going to have problems because of the Y2K problem. We should just have a company that what it does is help them with those transitions. We become the expert in everything that we've seen, all the date formats, all the everything, and help them through it. And you don't have to gouge them, but it costs money to get those things done. And a lot of places, they didn't want to do it themselves. They just wanted to hand it off to somebody. And especially if you want like deniability, we didn't break it. We weren't the ones that wrecked it, but these guys that we brought in, then you have to be sure of what you're doing. I'm sure there's opportunities like that now. Remember, PCs have similar problems that it wasn't like back in BASIC that they had a standard default date that was the earliest it could go back because it was all based on
Unix has 1169, I think is what it is, the epoch.
Exactly. And so when you find out that things did exist before 1969 or whatever else it might be, I'm sure that there's more than what I think about time bombs where some utility is going to break because they didn't realize that the calculation of a starter date to now is going to overflow the field. And what are they going to do when you find out that this water system that has now been around for 70 years, and back then they said, for sure in the next 70 years, they're going to do it. They're going to redo this. And so we don't have to do anything that's going to last more than 25 years because computer systems will change as our physical systems do. And then you find out what you just talked about, that something that's been running 25 years that was almost like put together for 2 or 3, and it has been valiantly patched and repatched and kept going, but eventually it will break and hard.
Yeah.
So
I've heard even recent times there's this Wisconsin, maybe, I don't remember, but a small automotive shop that has their invoicing and stuff still running on a Commodore 64.
I worked with a client that was using old Foxbase. Like it hadn't even moved to Fox Pro, and it used to be DBase 3, and they had moved up. They thought they were very proud of the fact that when Fox Pro came out that they had moved to that. But I had I had to do my own Y2K stuff. I had to do all kinds of stuff to just make it like when I arrived, I continually had to explain we can't add this new feature until we stabilize the existing system because all it will do is just be like a teetering stack and we're finally going to make it topple over. And I think that there was not suspicion, but they weren't wanting to spend any more money than they had to. And I don't think they thought I was making things up, but they were always pissed about, the guy that handled it before me, Mike, like, why didn't he take care of that all those years? Because he had 5 clients he was juggling amongst. And until you said, this is so important that now we're going to pay you to do it, you know what I mean? There's all kinds of social and business reasons to not be perfect
or
working.
the trouble it's going to cause for the company and the disruption and the chance of something totally breaking and losing data and stuff. Sometimes is it worth the risk right now? I don't know.
Yeah.
And something this also made me think of, I just read about, there is a company still open that is, its whole thing is to sell parts for Atari game systems. And they've been open for 41 years.
I believe it. Whenever I go to a pinball show, they have people that they have all the inventory of all the various different parts for all the various different manufacturers. And I think at one point they started to like 3D print their own stuff.
Yes.
Because there was nobody making these things anymore, but they had the spec. So I admire that maybe they're a point of last resort. And if you really want to keep this running, you're going to have to get somebody that can produce, and especially when companies back then, I think they made things even non-standard so that if you were a C versus all the five major manufacturers, they each had their own standard so that you couldn't, again, leave them easily. That whatever you learned here, I don't know, the fact that they had to, that multiplier of, if I'm going to support all the industry, now I have to have five different bins, not just one bin for a flipper, because the flippers are not exactly the same. Oh,
Right.
it's cool to find that kind of stuff out. But I know there's a great quote along the lines of, if we built buildings like we build software, one woodpecker could destroy civilization. Because under the surface of all kinds of, and bear with me, I worked for Pete Marwick, and I worked in a particular area of theirs called the Catalyst Group. And what they specialized was technology transition. That instead of always writing new code, they went to the Banco de Puerto Rico or Pacific Gas and Electric and said, you've reached the point where your own coders don't understand how things are working. And now the government has said, we're going to have to change that there's multi rates for water based on what county you're in or something like that. And we specialized in taking like assembler and moving it into COBOL. Back then, that was state of the art, or old, terribly maintained, thorny, tangled COBOL and making it into structured COBOL, where you really could sit down with the code and not depend on the comments to figure out what was going on. You could see that this is how it works. Here's the flow through, and here's how it does all the perform statements and all that kind of stuff. And the kinds of things that we found out, the first big places to automate were big banks, big insurance companies, big utilities, because they had the volume of transactions that they had to handle. They also had the most years of maintenance, and they also had the most creativity in the part of their various different programming staffs to continually stay just one step ahead of disaster. And when we would go in and do some of these transformations, you'd find out things like, wow, a third of the code in your system is dead. It can't be executed. It can't be reached. Someone coded around it, but they left it in place because there might be a need to turn it back on.
Or to know where it used to go and stuff. I've done that myself. It's, I
Exactly.
don't want to get rid of this. I'll just comment it out.
And we did experiments with COBOL compilers from IBM, from Fujitsu. There was multiple vendors of that. And some of what we did with structured retrofit and PathView were just pointing out, here's how your code works or doesn't work and why. And it was always revelations of people finding out, wow, we didn't realize that by having 100,000 line code base, really only about 60,000 of that is working, and the other ones are saved off to the side. But people are now, oh my God, don't take that out because we don't know what would happen if we did. Oh, it was interesting to have to explain, like I said, to people that were very proud of what they had, that kind of over the weekend decision that somebody made 4 years ago, it's haunting them still. They got it working, but it wasn't the most maintainable, it increased fragility. We used to talk about systemic versus, like, I guess, specific risk. And that this is a terrible thing to say, it wasn't only that there were some examples of that, it's that if you looked at who last touched a whole bunch of stuff in either Panvalet or they had code, how those things were stored, always had who last touched it, the date and an ID
Right.
associated with it. And you find out that this guy's the angel of death. This guy, the last 10 things that we've had go wrong, it's all because he touched them last. He doesn't try to find out. He's not, whatever else it might be. And one of the recommendations we had to make was not only fix the code, but don't let him change anything anymore. You know what I mean? He
Right.
really is Wild West guy, and he doesn't check. He doesn't even test it. He pushes it into production. Back then, you used to have a big difference between development, testing, and production. And how many times we saw something just thrown out into production, where if this breaks, like all your bank transactions for that day are not going to get processed. I'm pretty sure you don't want that to happen. You haven't been able to like put the reins on this guy to make it that he submits it to the Q&A group and that they test the hell out of it to make sure there's no regressions.
There is a lot of, let's say, management, owners of companies, whatever, people in charge of whatever. A lot of times it's like, oh, we don't have time to go through that 10 hours of testing. We need it up now. And you're trying to explain to them that testing is part of it. We don't want to pay for that. We want to pay for you to fix it and fix it right the first time. And I know that by testing it. There's just there's too many things to check. capital letter, lowercase letter, an apostrophe, a space in a weird spot. Yes, there's a lot of standard code to handle things, but sometimes interactions between different functions and systems, you don't get what you expect. And testing is integral to making it sure it works. But so
Absolutely.
many times throughout the years, it's been like, oh, we don't have time for that. Just make it go live. Okay, but I'm not working this weekend.
The reason that we have the new coders, the Wild West, is that some companies, they started to do, like Facebook is a good example. They just put things out. They didn't really test it across all the possible platforms and browsers and whatever else it might be. They just put things out and they counted on the hue and cry from the populace is going to be enough to highlight the big things. And they're never trying to get to perfect. They're just, if we get to where there's enough broken things, we'll fix that and keep on going. And that diminishment of quality. It used to be, in order to put things out, it wasn't on the net, it was onto a CD, and you pressed 100,000 of those. And if some bug goes out that way, there's a big overhead to reissuing whatever program, whatever game it might be, and stuff like that. And places like, wow, Duke Nukem, I'm trying to think of the things that were perpetual vaporware because they kept putting things out that broke so spectacularly that people stopped buying it when it first came out. They were like, I'm going to wait for like version 1.2 after they've worked out all the bugs because they have failed to do so how many times. And especially in the game, I hate getting to where I'm a third of the way through the game and it just breaks and I can go no further. And yet I paid $50 for it. And so whatever that gunslinger mentality, when I worked out at, I did my .com things, was working for a company called Topica. And we had a guy that was continually, like, we had a development test production environment, and yet he was really a good coder, but of course he wasn't perfect, and he continually snuck things into the production release that had not been tested, and they would break. And when you thread all that through and find out once again it was Kig, that it was, wow, I he helped build the company, he helped get it to be what it was, but he had that arrogance of, I did this at 2 a.m. and I'm sure it'll work. And it didn't. And then it was shades of all the things we're seeing now, the people that have that incredible arrogance of thinking they're perfect and not wanting anybody to look at their, it was very hard to be in I was one of the release managers, and getting it to be like, you're making a mistake costs 100 hours to fix it, how many people, and then it's an emergency instead of a standard thing. And it was very frustrating to say, this is all true, and go to upper management and them still saying, yeah, but we really wanted that new feature out, and so push it. And wow, I can't make you a guarantee, but I can give you a probability that it's going to break 1 out of 5 times.
When
And
we were
every
talking
time we go
about
through this, oh my God.
when we were talking about the project, the first thing we did was set the date we want to release it. Then we figured out what functionality would be needed and how long it would take. And then we told you that, no, it has to be done by this time because we arbitrarily set a date. How many projects have you been on like that? It's like, you can't do it in a week. It's going to take longer. No, it needs to be done in a week. Good luck.
Right.
Oh, look, a week later, it's not ready. Somebody should have told you that. Somebody should have said it would take longer than a week.
We had things at Ameritech where people knew it was broken going out, but no lie, the development team was different than the maintenance team, and they just put it out there and said, we declare this is now in maintenance mode, and someone else is going to have to fix it because they didn't give us enough time. And luckily, they had some good sense about, Ameritech had 5 states, and easily Illinois and Ohio were the big dogs in terms of the amount of volume, maybe, and then maybe Michigan next, but definitely Indiana and Wisconsin were the small of the runts of the litter in terms of how much the transaction volume and the number of dollars flowing mattered. And so oftentimes when there was something about those states that it had to be done for them specifically because they had, it doesn't matter, they would just say, we're going to just say that Wisconsin and Indiana aren't as important, and we're putting this out there, and we know that we're not going to get the calls, but some call center is going to get all the calls of, hey, my support asset system, I can no longer find telephone poles because something changed. And we're in maintenance mode. We'll put that on the list of the 500 things that your feedback to give us a priority for that fix. But it wasn't trying to get features into a new release. It was then it was an artifact of the social system that they had around their coders and their maintainers and so forth, as opposed to the desire for, if not perfection, even excellence, that they knew it was broken going out and they still, you think I'm going to get fired? I'm going to miss my bonus because I didn't meet the deadline that someone had come up with no understanding of how to close
Right.
that date. Have many times talked. When do they want to push the thing? When there's a low volume period. And when is that? The holidays. And so how many holidays have we had spoiled because they were going to do it over Christmas or Thanksgiving or Labor Day, Memorial Day, or whatever is supposed to be like a 3-day weekend? If something breaks, we have an extra day. We have Monday. You mean the Monday that I was going to be with my family at the cook? I
Right.
mean that day that I was going to take a road trip. I long ago, when I was an independent consultant, instead of having to work at a company, one of the things I often had to tell them was, I've got a vacation planned, and I will do everything I can to make sure that we plan ahead for my absence for those 2 weeks, because it's not going to be that you can call me back. I'm going to be hiking in the mountains, and I don't know that I'm like nowadays. It's not, can you get signal or not? Back then it was, I'm not going to be at a phone for every day for 15 hours while I'm hiking. And even then, when I get back, I'm not checking my phone for messages. I'm on vacation. And so I got any number of times big conflicts, but I had those conflicts early instead of when things were breaking and spectacularly wrong, because I just told them, I'm telling you in January, I'm going on vacation in July. And whatever we need to do to make sure that you know that I'm gone and out of pocket, I can't be reached, because I'm not taking the blame for this when you mismanage everything leading
I,
up until
I
July.
actually worked with somebody that this could be a whole long story, but
Okay.
would go on vacation and say, I can only work 4 hours in the morning. What? You can work none, but
If you're on
what?
vacation, right.
But the company actually would be like, okay, that's good. We'll make sure if we need you, we're either sending an email so you can get to it in that time, or we'll only call you during that time. They're at least good enough that we'll only call you during that time.
Right. Interesting contrast for that is, I worked for any number of bank systems, and I had a friend who worked for a big bank, and they said they actually mandated that people had to take vacations long enough that if they were doing chicanery and it depended on their controlling data or transactions or being able to manipulate things, that for 2 weeks things would break if they weren't there to shepherd bad transactions through the system. They did it as like a crime busting technique, because any
Wow.
number of times people had been doing things for years, and the way that they were revealed is because they weren't able to maintain, they had too much control over a system, and they had decided, if nobody else is looking at these things, I can move money to this account. I can put in false expenses and that kind of stuff. And multiple times things were revealed because someone either took a vacation or got sick and were out. And then when something like, what's this funny thing happening over here? Finally, it was revealed. How sad, but there's often, what would you call it? Rats in the pipes, that they've learned how the system works and they're happy to take more than their share, because any number of companies, as they have it, that there's signing authority, and you need to be able to have two people look at transactions over a certain size, and maybe sometimes two people is enough that they can still find a way to collude, like they happened with the LIBOR rate long ago. And so it's, how many do we need? 3, 5? How big do you have to make it? Or what untouchable can you bring in that no matter what, they're not going to be corrupted? Because big money makes people evil. Or
Yeah.
at least opportunistically evil. You know what I mean?
So I'm about to get going here in a couple minutes, but real quick, the other night I went and saw Titus, comedian over at Hilarities. First comedian I've been to in a long time. I really like him. When he had his TV show on, I kind of, Gina watched him and said, I don't like this. It reminds me too much of my family, of my life and stuff.
Oh
And it
my.
bothered her. And I'm
Okay.
like, I can relate to some of what he's doing, but he brings it across in a pretty funny way. So I was like excited to go see him. Of course, the cheapest part of the night was the tickets themselves. Everything else cost more. But it was interesting because I've seen he's got 11 or 12 specials on HBO and other stuff. It's not like he's new or anything,
Yeah.
but he's in between big specials and stuff. He's going to small clubs and testing out new material. So he had his laptop and it was scrolling. He'd stop it every now and then. He told us flat out, he's sorry, this is all new material I'm testing out on you guys. I hope you're enjoying it. I can do that joke better. Hold on. and he'd back up and go do it again, like as practice. And it was cool in a way.
How a comedian does things, that they
Yes.
spoon how they say things. That's
Yes.
interesting.
And,
Yeah.
and he reacted to us a couple times. He'd say something and oh, you guys like that joke a whole lot more than I thought you would. And he said something else and we groaned. Like, oh, okay, that's an issue in Ohio. That's something for,
Yeah.
and then he said another and he paused. He goes, oh, come on, guys. That's the best joke of the night. I love that one. So it was interesting. It was fun, but you could tell the difference between the polished, big audience show that he's practiced for the last 2 years, as opposed, these are all new jokes. I'm working on transitions and stuff. It was still funny, but it'll be interesting in a year or two if he comes out in our special to watch it and see if it's the same jokes and if any of them changed.
Yeah, have they? Honestly, we've had wonderful experiences multiple times with that. We're like George Carlin, when he was working on his special, he came to the Lorraine, no, down in Canton, if I remember right, and said that some of this is going to be a little bit rough and I'm looking for your reactions. And he kind of like made notes while he was going along. And same, Lewis Black has done it, Bill Burr has done it. Nick Costas, the guy who owns Hilarities, really seems to be beloved in the industry. And any number of people will do that. They'll come to his club first before they go on the theater tour. I think that's happening with Louis C.K. That
Yeah, he's
going to be
coming.
there, and we're not going to be able to be there for exactly those dates. We're going to see him later on, maybe at Akron Civic or something like that. But they really do, and get the workout, get the immediacy of a club thing. I really like those things where you can tell that people are working on it and that they trust the audience enough. And especially Colleen and I often sit in the first couple rows because we're good laughers and we get it in a lot of ways. And he has any number of people have been very kind when we visit with them after the show to say, I love that you were with me every step of the way. And I love when things that you didn't think they were as funny, I think you're right, that they thought our opinion, our judgment of what was going on. Because I've seen 50 years worth of comedy. I've been going to the second seat and everything forever. And Colleen too now for the last 25 years. So we're a good barometer. We're not the smartest or the grossest or the most Midwestern Ohio, whatever. But overall, we catch a good joke quick and all that kind of stuff. So it's cool to be like, any number of times when after shows, people will come over they made a point of not just shake hands and move on. It was like, just want to say, by looking at what you were paying attention to, it helped me tune things. You know what I mean? That's kind of cool.
Smaller, lesser known comedians strike me as being a lot like authors. And I've said an author, most of the time, can walk down the street, sit at a restaurant, and there's very few people that would recognize them.
Yeah.
I remember when I took my mother to see Baldacci for a Christmas present, he was sitting there and this couple was like looking at him. Finally, one came over and said, excuse me, but are you? And he goes, yeah, I might be. And then they said something like Nick Cage. Yep, that's me. And, they totally got it wrong. I think it was James Patterson. They thought he was Patterson.
Okay.
And he's, yeah, sure. But I think a lot of comedians are like that, especially when they're coming up. Now, obviously, Tim the Tool Man, if he sits down at a restaurant, he's going to get mobbed. But he went up. He had a TV show. He's big. Titus is maybe a step below that big, but tons of comedians that are 2 steps below that.
Yeah.
You don't know them unless you were in that club.
We so much prefer the club environment that when people break out big and they start being in theaters and stadiums, like Sebastian Maniscalco, who we like for a long time, now he's really big. And it's just not the same experience to see somebody from 40 seats away and Ant on the stage instead of he's right there. He's right there where you could Amy Schumer. It's a different experience. Yeah.
Which goes back a bit to a discussion we had long ago about bands. You got a small band, maybe a small album, but then they come out with this like huge hit album and people are like, oh, you're a sellout and blah, 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 because it's all big and it's not necessarily they were sellouts. It's just they said, this is what people are listening to. Let's write that.
I hear you. One of the things I've been doing lately, Facebook-wise, is they have all kinds of bands that are saying, we want to send you our CD for free, just cover the shipping and handling. And if it's any of the genres that I enjoy listening to, prog and folk and whatever else, I bought all kinds of $6, $8, $10 CDs to give it a try. And some of them have proven to be great. And others are like, I won't be following your career. You know what I mean? It's cool that they're using that kind of Kickstarter.
That's a good idea, yeah.
That kind of thing. And I like that. I like that they're learning to put their best foot forward, package themselves. Just give me a try. Just listen to this and see if you like it or not. And sometimes yes and sometimes no. So
Nice.
Okay,
I got to get rolling.
very good. It's always a pleasure, Stephen. Take care.
Yep. Talk to you later, man.
You have been listening to the Relentless Geekery podcast. Come back next week and join Alan and Steven's conversation on geek topics of the week.